Hello and welcome to today's Trendspotting by Lund University. And for you who don't know, Trendspotting is a series of webinars and seminars hosted by LU Innovation and VentureLab by Lund University, where we talk about trending topics within innovation. And today's topic is the economy after Corona, what we can learn from other crises. We will start off with a presentation by our keynote speaker, Åsa Hanson, and thereafter move forward to a panel discussion together with Thomas Frostberg, Karsten Deppert, Linn Alfredsson, Niclas Östlund, and of course Åsa Hanson. My name is Cecilia Bisgård and I work at VentureLab and will be today's moderator. Thank you for tuning in, and now let's get started.
I was thinking to talk about why this situation is different from other crises, and also like how we can avoid, maybe not avoid because that's maybe too late, but how we can make the economic crisis milder. Like what can be done, and also maybe some long run aspects and some speculations how this might turn out in the long run. So first of all, crises, they come and crises go. So having a crisis, an economic crisis, is nothing new. We had plenty of them and we will have plenty of them in the future too. So this is just some examples of crises that we've been going through lately or in the last century. So that was the Great Depression in the 1930s. We had the oil crisis in the 1970s. In Sweden, we suffered a quite big depression in the 1990s, and then there was the IT crisis 2000, and then the last crisis 2008, and now then the 2020 COVID crisis. So usually when we have a crisis, they're caused by some kind of imbalances or structural problem. Typically that we have maybe too much liquidity and misprices, so we create speculations, and then these speculations create bubbles that then burst, and then we have a crisis. But that's not really, I would say that we have structural problems in our economy right now, but it's not those that have caused this crisis, but instead it's the virus. So pandemics, it's nothing new with them either. They come and they go too. So this slide just lists a few, or quite a few pandemics that we have been through, and then estimated number of people that died from them. And then as you see, there's been quite a few pandemics. That's nothing new. Some of them we still are suffering from, which is not COVID, like AIDS and Zika. And there's also been quite a few deaths from this pandemics. So crises are not new, pandemics are not new. So then what is new? So what is new this time? And one thing that that might be different is that the impact of the pandemics. Hopefully that will not be the case, but it could be. So previously, the pandemics that we have suffered from have impacted the economy, but they've done so with a V-shaped pattern, which means that we've seen a downturn in economic performance, and then very quickly we bumped right up again. So the impact has been very short-term. And the loss to the economy has mainly been caused by deaths, people being sick, and then people staying home to care for the sick ones. And then some too that maybe were afraid of getting sick. But now today we have like a different situation where we have these lockdowns that makes this pandemic different than others. And also that we've seen a quite big impact on the stock market that has not been the case before. Even though the stock market has recovered, it still has gone down quite a bit. And that could be an indication that it's a more long-run effect on the economy. And as I said before, previous economic crises have usually been caused by some structural imbalances, misprices, or something that is asymmetric in the economy that causes speculation. And then you try to fix that structural problem and get out of the crisis. But now it's not primarily that, it's instead a virus. And that makes it kind of new. And then, so I would say that the situation today is very special compared to how it's been before. So now we have a shock, both to the demand side and the supply side. And the shock is quite different than when we have demand and supply shocks otherwise. So demand is drastically reduced, but it's not really driven by weak demand from consumers, like lack of willingness to consume, but rather by this lockdown that they're not able to consume. So for instance, now that we see things today that we haven't really seen before. Like now we learned yesterday that the oil price is actually negative. So you actually get paid for taking on oil. So then if we say we have reduced demand, pumping in money to the economy is not going to help, because it's not lack of money yet that is driving the demand shock. I mean, it will be when people start getting unemployed and losing income. And also we have a shock to the supply side. And that's caused by a halt in international trade and also the lockdown, that you're not able to go to work. So how do you solve this? So it's a new situation, and the traditional things such as pumping in money might not actually work. And then another thing that I think is very different with this shock is that we have uncertainty. We always have uncertainty, but now we have a great amount of uncertainty. Nobody really knows what's going to happen. When will this be over? Will there be a second wave? Will there be a third wave? And also that we are in some sense more vulnerable because we lived in a very integrated world, and the Swedish economy is very dependent on what happens elsewhere. So even if we do smart things in Sweden, our economy is so dependent on what happens in the rest of the world. So we're still dependent on everybody else. So how do we deal with this? Just to see a little bit what has been expected. So last week, I think it was, the government presented their spring budget, where they have a scenery. They have one base. I'm sorry, this is in Swedish on the slide. But they have two scenarios, one that they call the base and one that they call like a more drastic scenario. And then on this slide, there's also predictions from IMF. So I really just want to show that if they expect quite a dramatic change in GDP, that it will decline by minus 4.2% in the good scenario, and by as much as 10% in the worst scenario. And unemployment will go up, the financial savings will go down, and the debt up. So I'm not going to go into these numbers in details, but I just want to say something about the world economy, the world GDP, which in January was expected to be plus 3.6% by IMF. And now it's been declined to minus 3%. So that's a big change. And just as comparison, when we had the recession 2008, world growth, or the GDP, was 0.1. So it wasn't negative, but it was low. So this is a quite drastic decline in GDP. Then, I mean, they don't expect it to be so long run. They expect that by 2021, we will be jumping up and having again a positive GDP. And if we look at the people that are have been given notice, these people are not unemployed yet, but they've been given notice that that might be the case. I just want to show this as a comparison to what happened in the crisis in the 90s and the crisis 2008, which you can see in this graph. So in the crisis 1990, that was quite a severe crisis in Sweden. The number of people given notice was around 20,000. And that was about the same number in the financial crisis 2008. And now we see this spike. And this graph is by now like a few days old. So I think the spike is even higher now. So it's what's going on right now is big. And I'm sure you all seen graphs from the US that show even worse numbers. So it's quite a drastic situation we're in. So how do we deal with this, and what should we focus on? And then there are certain things that we want to try to avoid. And one of those things is mass unemployment. I mean, obviously it's bad to be unemployed for individuals, but it is also bad for the society as a whole. So we want to prevent firms from laying off people, because mass unemployment is very expensive for the society as well. And we also want to avoid that healthy firms go out of business because of this virus, because it's not caused by them doing bad businesses, it's caused by something that's very external. And then what we really, really, really want to avoid is to create a financial crisis. So we don't want this virus to spread into the financial market, where the banks will stop functioning. And typically when we have a crisis, the instrument we use is monetary policy. So we use interest rate and money supply and pump in money and lower the interest rate to get out of a crisis. Today, we kind of used up that instrument. We just recently got out of having a negative interest rate, so there's probably not that much room to conduct monetary policies anymore. So today, so I'm part of this Swedish fiscal policy, where we evaluate the government's policies. And the big discussion now around the world is like, how do you deal with crisis now when you can't use monetary policies? Should you then use fiscal policies, and how efficient are they? So most economists are now quite convinced that what we're going to have to use to a larger extent is fiscal policies. So that is, we have to play with the government's expenditure side and taxes, and try to stimulate the economy by using that. And then when you design policies in this situation, I mean, there are three things that you want to think about when you design them. And one is that they should be timely. That means at the time right now, they should be coming now when the firms and people need it. So it's very important that we act quickly, but it's also the case that we don't know how long this crisis is going to last. So we can't just spend all the money right now, because we probably need more later, and it might be the case that we need to kickstart the economy once this crisis is over. So the timing is important, but not so easy to deal with, and especially not when you're having fiscal policies, because they tend to take longer time to design than monetary policies. And then you also want these policies to be temporary and not permanent, because it's typically very hard to withdraw benefits that you're giving out. So one example of a Swedish policy that was meant to be temporary, but we still have 60 years later, is rent control. Rent control was supposed to be relief during the war to tenants, but then it's been basically impossible to remove it. So you have to be careful that when you design these policies, that they don't become permanent. And then also very important is that they're targeted, so they target those that actually need them and benefit them, and not anybody else. So then what do? So that's like more like theoretical, how you want it to be. Then you have to turn that into practice and actually design efficient policies. And I would say that's not an easy task. So I would say that the situation now is extremely difficult. And what they've done so far, the Swedish government, so the Swedish government has done less than many other governments and been criticized for that. And what they've done is trying to prevent firms to laying off their staff, so we avoid mass unemployment. And they've been trying to reduce fixed costs for firms by reducing rent costs and also taxes, and then provide liquidity. So they've been providing loans. Is this enough? I'm sure we'll get back to discuss that in the panel, but it's not an easy task. And as always, the devil is in the details. So when you design these policies, it's important that they are not misused. And they could actually like create more problems if you design them in the wrong way. So for instance, in Norway, they have designed policies where you get where the government pays 70% of the salary to firms that see their revenues go down by 30% or more in April and May. So it's in the future they're going to judge whether they get, if they have reductions in revenues. And obviously this might then affect firms, how much revenues they have, if they get the government to pick up the bill for the wage in the future. So then that could actually hurt the economy more than it benefits the economy. So in Sweden, the policies have been criticized because they are administratively costly, and I also have some degree of uncertainty whether they will get them or not, because they want to create them so that it's actually the firms that have a chance to survive in the long run that will benefit from them. So you have to apply for these benefits. They're not automatic. And then there's also the question, will this pandemic affect our behavior in the long run? Is it the case that we will in the future travel less than we do now? Then maybe you shouldn't try to help the industry, the travel industry as much maybe. And then we also, unfortunately, or this could also be a benefit, is that we just, before Corona, we were heading out of a booming business cycle. So even before this, the government probably needed to stimulate the economy, and now they need to do so even more so. And then, as I said before, Sweden is a small economy, and we're very dependent on the rest of the world because we export a lot. And we also tend to export investment goods, which are goods you don't consume every day, like cars. So that could also, in certain ways, be a hindrance, because those are goods that you can wait a few years to consume. And so far, what the government has done has costed about 2.1% of GDP. And just as a comparison, the crisis in 2008, the cost of that was 1.3%. And it's likely that we're going to need more than this 2.1%. So it's going to cost a lot. And as I said before, we don't want this crisis to spill over into a financial crisis. So we don't want firms to not be able to pay back their loans. We don't want individuals not to be able to pay their mortgages. And that's why the government has backed up loans now by 70%, which means that the taxpayers is bearing the risk and could potentially be paying a lot. So we want to avoid a U-shaped crisis where we stay down for a long time in the recession, or what we really want to avoid is like an L-shaped crisis where we stay down for an extended period of time. And in the long run, I think this crisis will lead to increased inequality, both within countries and within, for instance, Europe and worldwide. One question that I've been thinking about a lot is what's going to happen to the European Union, and especially the monetary union. I mean, I think the solidarity and the lack of cooperation within the union has been lacking, unfortunately. And also now we're going to see big differences, especially in Southern Europe. They have suffered more than in Northern Europe so far. They're going to have to be helped out. Is there solidarity enough to do that? What's going to happen to international trade and globalization? Is that going to come to a halt? You see signals of that. On the plus side, we might get a better climate, and we might change some other patterns in our lifestyle that could have positive effects. And just to end on a more positive note, so crises tend to make us more creative and more innovative. And as I said before, crises have typically been caused by structural problems, and then the crises have forced us to undertake reforms that are needed but maybe politically undesirable to undertake. So Sweden did fairly well in the crisis 2008, and one of the answers to that and the reasons to that has been sometimes speculated that it was because we had a crisis in the 90s where we learned and actually did some painful structural reforms that helped us in 2008 crisis. And I think we have structural problems today in the Swedish economy, so hopefully this is a chance to make these reforms and come out better in the long run. And then another thing that's put Sweden into a quite good situation in this crisis is that we have good public finances. We've been, our debt going into this crisis is 35% of GDP, which is quite low in an international perspective. So we have money to spend on this crisis. The problem is how much are we willing to spend now and how much do we need to save? And we are then pushing the cost up onto future generations. And then another positive thing is that we just left the booming business cycle, which means we are also on the personal level in a pretty good shape. And just to get a little bit of perspective here to things, this is not going to be the end of the world, I don't think. So this graph here shows the development of GDP in a more longer perspective, starting in the 1990s. And as I said in the start of the talk, is that we have had a lot of crises during this time period. For instance, there was one in 1930s, that was the Great Depression. You see that down here. You see a dent. And then you see the Second World War here, a little dent. You see a little bit of a dent here in the 70s. There was an oil crisis. You see a little bit bigger dent in the crisis in the 1990s. And then there's the dent 2008. But overall, I mean, we've seen quite progressive and positive GDP growth. And I'm sure we're going to see a dent here too. But it's not going to be the end of the world. I think when we look back at 2050, we look back at this crisis, we're going to see a dent and then we're going to pop up again. So I end here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Åsa. Pleasure to hear you speak. And we will now move on to start the panel discussion, basically. And as you can see on the screen, we have 5 big names up. We have Thomas Frostberg, who is a business columnist at Sydsvenskan. We have Karsten Deppert, who is a Serie entrepreneur, and he's also the owner of Mindpark. We have Linn Alfredsson, who's the founder of Tech Academy Nordic and also working as an associate at Hannes Snellman law firm. Åsa Hanson, who's just been taking the screen, who's an associate professor here at Lund University. We also have Niclas Östlund, who's a business developer at Green Innovation Park. So, Åsa, wanting to ask you, you talked about a lot of different crises and the effects of it. Those crises. Are there any previous crises that we can see the same, potentially see the same effect of for this crisis?
I mean, I think it's a very good question, and it's hard to say. I would say, I mean, it's been compared to the crisis in the 1930s in its severeness. But I would say that maybe the crisis 2008 has some resemblance too, but also some differences. And I think one resembles between these two crises that we have today and the one in 2008 is that we got just halt, like a very abrupt stop to things functioning. And in 2008, we had a very abrupt stop to the financial sector functioning with these subprime loans, these CDOs, these instruments that were created from loans that weren't creditworthy, and nobody really knew where they were. So the financial market just froze. And now we see the same like frozenness, that we had an economy that was functioning and all of a sudden everything's just freezing. And there's a big halt to everything. So that's, as I see it resembles. But then when we had the crisis 2008, we kind of knew what to do to solve it. Because the problem was that the financial sector wasn't working, so we needed to create some credibility and pump in liquidity into that market. And that we did. And I mean, you can argue whether it worked or not. But we got the economy back, the real economy back, working quite quickly, I would say, given the depth of the crisis. Now we don't really know what to do, because it's caused by a lockdown and not by structural problems. So it's not going to work to just pump in money. And also that we are in a different situation, that we can use up our monetary policies on the crisis 2008. So we lost that instrument. So I would say that it's resembles that in terms of like everything just freezes down and it halts, it stops. But I think we are in a more difficult situation, how we're going to solve this crisis. But hopefully it won't last that long. I mean, we don't know. If this is over in like another quarter or so, I mean, then I don't think it's going to be so bad. But if there's a second wave coming back, and I mean, then it could be potentially much worse.
So I was muted, obviously.
Yeah.
I turned muted, sorry. I was asking a question, actually. A sector that was hit by a crisis not that long ago here in Sweden is the green industry, with the droughts and the wildfires of the summer 2018. So Niclas, what kind of parallels and differences can you see in between that crisis and the current one?
All right. Yep, that's quite a big question. Do you hear me good? Okay. Yeah, for you who don't remember, back in 2018, we had really big wildfires in Sweden, up in actually in 50 different places. And even before that, we had in 2014 already also large wildfires. At that time, it was 13,000 hectares, and in 2018, it was actually 25,000 hectares, which would be approximately 36,000 football fields. So it was a big thing definitely in 2018, and it was. I think one of the similarities with the COVID, it's kind of hard to compare to COVID though, as we don't know, we don't have a COVID behind us and so, but it was very heavy national media coverage on during the wildfires, definitely. So that's maybe some kind of similarity that we have, and also a similarity that we weren't that prepared for this either. In Sweden, we have had a history of relying quite a lot of other countries when it comes for deliveries of, for example, when it comes to the COVID, with instruments and shield visors and medicines and stuff like that. And this has been the case also during the wildfires in a way. So there was a lot of solidarity actually shown from the European countries. There were, I think it was about 11 countries that were involved in taking these wildfires down. So there were Italian water bombers and from France, and so a lot of countries, even 6 firefighters from Greenland. So there are some similarities, but I would say that I mean, when it comes to the wildfires, you could see definitely connection to the climate change, for example, which is kind of hard for me to do, at least when it comes to the COVID. So that was some of the similarities and differences. I think we haven't seen this, maybe not yet so far anyways, the same solidarity within the European Union, or when it comes to the COVID crisis here. But I think it eventually will come also. It started that the other countries are helping each other with machines or whatever instruments that is needed in other countries. There are some similarities, but quite a lot of differences, I would say. And one last thing is that when it comes to the economy, I don't think we have seen the beginning of the extent of the crisis when it comes to COVID. The wildfires, they cost about 900 million Swedish kronor, which is, I mean, that's not a lot in the case of a global crisis like the pandemic. All right.
Thank you, Niclas. Thank you. Thomas, talking more of a regional level, what do you think companies in Skåne can do to ease or perhaps counteract the economic impact this crisis causes?
So I think the first thing every company needs to do after, I mean, the last few weeks when I guess it's been crazy, whatever you were running a restaurant or running a startup, is to actually sit down for a short while, at least an hour, and try to evaluate different scenarios. What happens if this goes on for not just, as we already know, a few weeks, which I think most companies thought in the beginning it would be a few weeks. It would just be so keep your breath and sort of stay safe. And I'm not just thinking about the virus, but actually the impact beyond the financial impact, the economic impact will go on. I think we all realize much longer. So make a few scenarios, whether this is sort of not 1 month, but even 3 or 6 months away, and try to see what would that mean for your company. How would you be able to survive? Are there other ways to get revenue than those you have today? Can you shift focus so that you're not sort of just panicking and running around and try to find just another customer where you sell your whatever service or goods for half the price or so? I think you had to do that in the beginning to cut down to just get some revenue. But I think the next step now is to try to find out, could you make a sustainable living out of, I mean, in this current climate, and in that is also included some of the packages from the government that Åsa mentioned, of course, to how would that fit into the overall picture? Would it be enough?
Thank you, Thomas. Continue onto that track. Linn, I'm curious to know how Tech Academy Nordic has been affected by this crisis.
Sure, yeah. I'm so happy to be here in this discussion. So Tech Academy Nordic is an initiative to actually create more tech education for law students. And what we've been doing is, obviously this is a physical event that we do for 2 days with a lot of other tech entrepreneurs and big tech companies, inviting them to speak about the educational side and so on. So we've been moving this digitally, and we're still in the transformation to like doing this, which has been, I think for us as such a small organization, pretty quick. But what I think we can see is that for larger companies, this takes time. It takes time to webinars and to move to kind of the digital side with everything. So obviously that's a big aspect and transformation for a lot of, I guess, organizations and big companies right now. But I think what's a good kind of development is that we can see, as we're here today, this is a webinar, right? So we can see that this is starting to happen more and more, which I really encourage, and I'm hopeful for what we can do with this, to be honest. I feel like a lot of even the older generation, so to speak, has been more adapted, I guess, to actually call into Zoom and Teams and other kind of tech tools, which I think a lot of them actually didn't use that much before. So I think this is a good development from a tech perspective.
Thank you, Linn. Talking about new ways of working and innovative new ways, I'm curious, Niclas, do you think it's possible that we will see an increase when it comes to innovative solutions within the green industry?
Absolutely. I think this what is happening now with COVID, and this is applicable for any business, I would say, or I mean, it accelerates processes. That's one big thing. Processes that were already initiated. For example, when it comes to digitalization and stuff like that, I think that a lot of businesses will be pushed into even in a faster pace than they were expecting from the beginning. And I mean, one of the branches within the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences would be agriculture, of course, and I think they may be the last business is coming into the digitalization, and since there are the government want us as a country to be more self-sufficient, which means that we will have to be able to produce more food. We will have to, we have to improve a lot when it comes to be more self-sufficient. And I think that will be a one push also for innovating. So there is a lot of innovation going on, and it will happen much more within the green industry, definitely. which I'm really looking forward to, because we have been a bit far away from technology sometimes, which I really like technical solutions to some things like this. So I'm looking forward to it, definitely. Yeah.
And Karsten, with your title as a serial entrepreneur, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what kind of newly started companies or businesses that you think will emerge from this crisis.
I think the big difference is, of course, this accelerates a lot of the digital trends in general. So anything which focuses on digital will, of course, be helped during this crisis, but that's only the short term. And I think a lot of people are thinking, oh, what can we do now about Corona, about the lockdowns? But that's not in focus. Like, the real business that will be started will be business which can actually work long term, because that's what's relevant in one way or another. And I mean, so I would say businesses will be started as usual, actually, like a lot of new business ideas. The biggest difference is that how the venture capitalist market works, for example. So like an entrepreneur usually likes uncertainty in a sense that they try new things. But financing of businesses, especially early stage businesses, it's called in Swedish riskkapital, but they don't like risk. They don't like to take any chances at all. And now the world suddenly becomes unpredictable. And when the world becomes unpredictable, nobody will fund a business, because it's like you don't know if you ever will get your money back. So there will be a big shift in how companies are started. You need to start with a customer. You need to have a business. Otherwise, it will be really hard to finance it. And that, I think, is the biggest change that will happen. It will probably take at least 5 or maybe longer until we see the VC market as we've had it the last 5 years in that sense.
Thank you, Karsten. Spinning more onto that question, Åsa, there's assumptions that a vaccine will take years to be in place, but the society needs to continue moving, so to say. What do you think it's important for business owners to think about right now to work within this situation, the crisis we have?
I mean, I think if it's going to take 2 years for us to have a vaccine and we're going to have a lockdown for 2 years, I think it's going to be very, very hard for many businesses to survive. So obviously that cannot go on. I mean, we will have to somehow open up the economy. I mean, Sweden is not, I mean, I'm talking more about other countries than Sweden. And as I said before, Sweden is so dependent on other countries. So even if we have a different strategy, it's still going to affect us what happens in the rest of the world. And I think, I think also some businesses will not make it. I mean, there are some thoughts about that. I mean, up until recently, we had a negative interest rate, and for a long time, money has been free, basically. So there have been, we say, our economy has been on steroids. So we've been pumping in so much money, so in that sense, we've been living in the happy 20th, that we had a really blooming economy, that money was free, we could consume, we could borrow money, firms survived. And now we're probably entering into a new type of economy where that will no longer be the case. So some firms will not make it, I'm pretty convinced about that. Others will pop up and will, as, I don't know who said it, but it was somebody who said that we'll probably be more self-sufficient. And I think that will be the case, but that also means that it's going to cost more. I mean, Sweden is not the ideal country to grow or to be a food producer, so it's going to cost more than when we can import. So we will probably have, we will get lower pensions, we will maybe live a little bit more like I lived when I was a child. You don't go on 10 business trips abroad, and we don't have to anymore, thanks to IT. So I think in some sense our life will probably change if this prolongs for a long time, especially if it would take 2 years before we have a vaccine, and that's going to be a lockdown until then, which is not possible. But it could be the case that countries will become more self-sufficient. But that comes at a cost. That we're going to consume less, which is not necessarily bad for us. But it all depends on the length of this crisis.
Thank you, Åsa. continuing on the track that you talked about, that not all companies will survive, even though it's a very sad fact. Thomas, when would you say it's the right time to pause or give up on a business or startup?
I think, as you said, I mean, it sounds very negative or so, but I think you need to turn that around and be sort of more taking control of over your own destiny and decide. I mean, instead of going very deep into depth and not be able to, once the crisis is over, to actually come out of that again because you have burned all your money. In some cases, it may actually be better to stop here and now and make a judgment. And I think it depends on what type of business you have. If you have a lot of patents and so on, it may actually be possible to just freeze the company instead of running for another 6 months and being at risk with what Karsten mentioned about the venture capitalist not being interested in funding you. And then you may run into bankruptcy in September. And if you are able to make a pause right now, just close down and not go bankrupt and not lose the control of your patents, you may be able to start up again in half a year or a year, and instead maybe focus on so separate yourself from the business in that sense and find another job, since it's obviously that in farming and in hospitals and in public service and other areas there are, I mean, a need for more people. So that could be slightly boring for an entrepreneur probably, but a more tactical way of doing it. For others, that could be completely wrong, because a year could be when you lose control of your sort of market position. If you were in some of a good position to be first to market, so you need to, again, I'm going back to, so take even in this very hectic time, sit down and rethink, because business is not for almost any company what it used to be only 4 or 5 weeks ago. We need to remember that I mean, what's happening in a day or a week now is maybe what took several months before. And that also goes for industries changing. There will be opportunities along the road, but it means that clinging on to a great idea from February may be a very bad idea in April, how bizarre it may sound, but there may be other things coming up. And we can see all the kind of digital business opportunities and just now all the tools we are using that many of us didn't even think of before. As Åsa said, we did business trips where we may or may not have needed to do it. And I think some of the things will go back to what it used to be, but the longer we stay in the crisis mode, we start changing the pattern of running events, how we do meetings, how we do business, where we consume, how we meet, etc.
I would like to elaborate a little bit on that as well. So what I'm seeing is like from a point of view of starting a new business, I would say it's actually a really good time to start a new business. Not because of, wow, no, you can start a video meeting business. No, that's a bad idea. Don't do it. That's already done. But in general, like all the big companies need in the next couple of months reevaluate what do we actually do. And they will all have legacy. They all have existing organizations. They all have depths. They all have whatever. Like they've done things in one way, and changing that will be very hard. So just like starting afresh and not having any legacy will give you a big advantage. So in that sense, we will probably see a lot of new companies started, not with super new or creative ideas. They will probably be a little bit different, like always. There will be a tweak. It'll be in a different way, but they will be started now because they actually can build a new organization which can adjust to the new reality.
Thank you,
can I jump in on that as well?
Yes.
I just want to add on what Karsten said. Like, we are entering something that we now kind of call the post-digital era. And I feel like more people are starting to talk about this as the development of innovation and creative solutions coming out of this crisis, to be honest. And we can see now for the past few years, we've been talking about businesses in kind of, oh, you need to be digital. Now we're digital. We're moving into the digital area. And kind of the movement the last 3 years has been disruption, digital disruption, innovative disruption. You know what I mean? I think Karsten is nodding. He's like, yeah, I'm with you. That's good. So what I think we will enter into is called the post-digital era. And what does this mean? So this basically means more customization, individualization, and the hyper kind of tech customization that we can see in other countries. Not so much in Sweden yet, but it's coming here. So for example, you can see that in India, students kind of can get their insurance credit evaluated through their social media activity, for example. You can see that there is a lot of 3D printing tools. We're talking about Amazon and Netflix. We're talking about on-demand deliveries and on-demand kind of shorter supply chain leads and stuff like that. And when we're entering into this new kind of age or area, something that I think is important for new and old businesses to think about is the data. What are we doing with the data, and how are we innovating the data? So this is something that I can see from kind of a tech perspective and also a legal perspective coming into this new era or age. So that's something that I think even for a new business is important to think about and kind of to leverage to their advantage if you're starting a new business now.
Niclas, do you want to add something to that?
Yes, I also would like to elaborate a little bit there. I would say that, I mean, the agriculture industry we haven't reached the post-digital era yet. So we're a little bit far away from looking in the rearview mirror, but we're just getting into that the digital era within agriculture. And one thing that I see is that there is a big opportunity for new companies to solve problems that older companies have. For example, within the agriculture businesses, there is a lack of people working in for example, picking strawberries, and I mean these very, very labor-intensive things. So I read the other day in a local newspaper here that there are a couple of students from Stenko, I think, that started this app that's supposed to match and make a matchmaking site for farmers to use to actually reach people that could work, to reach the labor. So that it's similar actually within the forestry industry also. So there is a big problem there, but they could need a lot of help from companies that are already in the post-digital area that could provide with new solutions. I think that would be really neat, actually.
Thank you, Niclas. Talking about different collaborations and how the society works all in one, we have a question from the audience that wonders how social entrepreneurship fits in this, especially when we're talking about the digital solutions or solutions overall, while actually dealing with people. Karsten?
I mean, I've myself been involved in a couple of different social entrepreneurship projects, and my feeling in general is that social entrepreneurship is one of the hardest parts of entrepreneurship, because you take both the tough parts about entrepreneurship and the tough parts about social working, and you combine it. So it's like it's a tough field to enter in any time. It will probably not be a lot easier coming out of this crisis. However, I think the government will, like with social entrepreneurship, it's quite often you end up with a business model which is government funded in one way or another. Like it's easy to end up there because it's a social good you're doing, and especially in Sweden, this government is mostly responsible for financing the social good. And in the next couple of years, the government probably will spend more than usually, not because they have more money, but because they're the only one who actually have money. So it might not be that as bad as it could be, but I will not say that it can be easy.
I could just add to that. I think I would like to believe that social entrepreneurs should be sort of in a pole position now and be better off then, because there are a lot of both the immediate things around medical devices and medical solutions, etc., that could go into I mean the impact you do on society, but also the sort of the waves that the virus creates in societies where social entrepreneurs should be needed. Although I think to the point that Karsten is making, it's already much harder for social entrepreneurs to get the money to prove their cases. It used to be the market is not really mature for it so far, and now I think if the venture capitalists are afraid of investing in classical venture companies, I'm afraid they would be even more reluctant to invest in these. But I'm actually right now, before we started meeting, in dialogue with one of those social entrepreneurs or companies that have been able to, they're about to announce a new round they just raised. I think they started to do it before the corona outbreak, but again, it depends on what things if you are in any kind of medical whatever, not just sort of virus scanning or so, or digital solutions to social challenges these days, I think there is an opportunity, but I'm afraid maybe you need to take out the word social from the entrepreneurship in this current climate. I'm sad to say, but to be blunt, to present it as more, this is a straightforward solution to a social situation we have right now.
Åsa, do you want to add on that? Unmute yourself first.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I just wanted to add a little bit about this social entrepreneurship and the funding of it. It was mentioned that it was going to be government funded, but I also think this crisis brings out a lot of solidarity, and you reevaluate your life and what's important or not. So I think you'll also see innovations in the financial markets with more like social bonds, where you like invest more in social issues than in financial markets. So I think there's a lot of opportunities, and I think crisis makes us innovative and also re-question what we are doing. So right now it's maybe doesn't feel so great, but I think in the long run it might actually, we might see more money going into more social entrepreneurship than we see today.
Yes, so we have both Karsten, Niclas, and Linn who wants to say something about that. Karsten, do you want to go first?
Actually, just elaborating a little bit on what Thomas and also Åsa said, like, it's actually true, of course. I mean, if the government will, if you're a social entrepreneur and your main customer is actually governments, and the governments will probably spend more, it might actually be more certain that you actually will get customers than if you're VC funded or investor funded in other ways. So yeah, it might actually be better time than for normal businesses in that sense. But I also agree a little bit with Thomas, like, unfortunately it can be that you need to be an entrepreneur solving a social problem.
Linn, do you have a comment? 1 second, so we can unmute you. Can you unmute yourself, Linn? There we go. Yes, now.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, so I just wanted to add on what Åsa said. I think this crisis kind of, combines this reevaluation on where are we, what's important to me in my life, career, etc. And the same thing goes for all the companies and innovation. So there is a trend that's been slowly kind of growing since I think 2017, 2018, which is called impact investment. And we haven't seen it yet, but to add to Åsa's comment, I think that might be something that we could see more going forward in strategies for companies to actually, who survives this crisis and come out of it strong. I think that's something that could be a new kind of strategy that we might see also in terms of innovation. So impact investment, that's something that I could see trending going forward, which also would kind of benefit these kind of social initiatives as well.
Niclas?
All right. One thing that I think is really, really interesting with this, and that we don't know the result on yet, but the change in the long-term behavior when it comes to how we as persons are behaving when it comes to due to the social distancing and the physical distancing and stuff like that, and how we interact with other people, how we are going to how we are going to move in the cities, for example, and what those changes will lead to. And I think that social entrepreneurship could maybe come in handy a little bit when it comes to that, because what happens when all these restaurants move out from the cities, for example, all those smaller companies, it has to be filled with something, and we have a huge need of actually meeting with other people, which there is a huge trend towards actually moving out into parks me being a landscape architect, that sounds great, but to move to parks and other to go on hikes and stuff like that. So there's a big trend, and I connect a little bit to what Åsa started to talk about the different pandemics. And for example, in 1980 and 1920, the Spanish flu led to the whole functionalism, the modernism, to create healthy cities, and one of the legacies was actually the public parks coming out from that pandemics. And it would be really interesting to what kind of maybe companies that could bud out from the situation that we have. Will the cities change, and in what manner? I don't know, but I think that the patterns of movement will definitely change. It's already done that in a really short period of time. And if COVID is for a longer period of time, that will have long-lasting behavioral changes, I think.
Thank you, Niclas. We have a question from the audience, which is more about the cause of this crisis. And it is whether you think that the economic problems are caused by the economy structure that has flaws. For example, constant need of GDP growth to ensure proper economy functioning. Karsten?
I don't have an answer to this. This probably Åsa should answer, I guess. But I just want to give an anecdote from something that happened to me like a week ago, which was that I met with a owner of a cafe and asked her like, how is it going? And she said like, yeah, no, it's worse business than usual. It's not totally dead, but yeah, it's a lot worse than usually. And like, and then we said like, but what will happen afterwards? Like, yeah, but just think about all the business trips people don't need to take anymore, and just think about all this, like how happy we can live and how good we can live. And that's kind of for me the paradox of society. Like we all think it's actually quite okay not to consume so much, but nobody can run a business if we don't consume. And these two is like it's hard to combine. So of course it's from my perspective, I would say of course it's the system's fault. But I don't know a better system.
Åsa?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
So if I understand the question right, it's like this question whether it's good to focus on growth, and that we've been focusing too much on economic growth, and that's wrong focus. And I think it's a little bit what Karsten said, that it's, I mean, there's a cost. I mean, economic growth is really more about whether we use our resources efficiently or not. And I think we all can agree, but we want to use what we have in the best way. And if you don't, and it seems also to be in the human nature that we wanna do better, we wanna make money, we wanna get better healthcare, we want better education for our kids, we want always be striving forward. So I think it's a little bit like communism. Communism sounds great, but it doesn't function. And I think striving not for growth sounds good, but it's really hard to avoid, because it's then Sweden, if we chose a different pattern than the rest of the world, we will have worse education system. We want to have the best medical care. Are we willing to take that cost? And I think it's really up to individuals to make the choice. So one thing that what I do research on when I don't focus on this is multinational firms' tax avoidance and how much they spend on trying to avoid taxes. And then you have like a scandal with Facebook or Amazon or Starbucks showing that they don't pay what they should be paying. And then you would think that individuals will get really upset and stop consuming Starbucks coffee and turn away from Facebook and Amazon, but they don't. They still. So I think we need to really then show. I mean, where the buck is. I mean, it's easy to talk, but then our action shows differently. So I think it's going to be very, very hard not to strive for economic growth.
Adding to that, we talk about new innovative ways of working and innovative solutions. We also have a question from the panel, from the audience, whether it wouldn't be more sensible to tackle the system itself rather than just working within it. What do you think about that?
Can you repeat the question, please?
If it wouldn't be more sensible to tackle the system itself rather than solutions within it, just trying to fix it until the next crisis happens. So developing more system that can itself sort of manage crisis.
So I'm not sure I understand the question 100%, but the problem is we don't know. I mean, you could just say that, okay, we should have been more prepared for this. And I agree, it would have been better if we had been prepared for this. But it comes at a cost. And we don't know what the next crisis is going to be. We know that's going to be a new crisis. We know that that's going to happen. But what will it be? We don't really know. So how do you prepare for every possible risk that you might face? I mean, if you can do that, it's going to be very, very costly. I mean, there are things in the system that are not functioning that I think we could repair to have a smoother economy, but I think it's really, really hard to prepare for every possible risk that could potentially happen. That would be very, very costly. But there's been, I mean, we've had a discussion in this Fiscal Policy Council whether we should have some, like we have a defense. We have a national defense. We used to have a national defense for like military crisis. Should we also have like an economic defense, where we have somehow like preparedness for an economic crisis or a pandemic crisis? I mean, we could, but it's you're taking resources away from other things then, and I think it's going to be hard to know what the next crisis will be caused by. So I think it sounds good, but I think in reality it's very hard to design this preparedness.
Thomas?
I'm not sure if I understood the question right, but what I find interesting in both this and the previous question is, I mean, the best ideas, as several have mentioned, coming up right now seems to be, can we do a better Skype or a better Zoom, or can we fly a little bit less when the crisis is over? But if we start thinking about reshaping or rethinking about economic growth as not just putting in more resources and doing more stuff and be richer, then actually more focus on efficiency, what would be different in that? I mean, how much we love to travel, I think most of us can agree that not all business trips we've taken in life has been the most efficient way of doing meetings, business. Some have definitely been necessary, some have not. And if an entrepreneur or a company or an NGO could come up with other ways of sort of getting more out of less, and that way turning the system upside down, I think that would be very interesting going forward. Whether that would be a successful business, I don't know, but it would be an interesting shift of perspective, and also including potentially other actors than the usual suspects from the financial sector and the traditional business environment.
Karsten, do you want to add something?
Just I agree there with Thomas as well, but also getting back a little bit to the question, like how to tackle it. I mean, I can just draw my own like experience. Like half a year ago, 6 months ago, sitting in a boardroom at a medium-sized company and having a discussion of, we have done a profit of these million of kroner. What should we do with it? I mean, sitting in that boardroom half a year ago and saying we should save it in case things go bad. Like, it wouldn't happen. Like, people would say, why should we save it? It's stupid. We should spend it to grow more. That's what we should do with the money. So like it's as Åsa said, it's really inefficient to be prepared, and we strive towards efficiency, and that that makes it hard to be prepared. Like, it's a choice to do.
Thank you. We have another question from the audience, and it is how someone who is a student should think right now in this situation in terms of what to do after graduation. What world will be there for them? Linn?
Oh, I get to go first. Amazing. So I have a lot of, I guess, initiatives focusing on education. And from my perspective, firstly, there's a lot of online education going on right now. So I would definitely look into that. And in terms of the job market, as all of us have been saying today, there will be a different market graduating now comparing graduating just 1 or 2 years ago. So what I will look into is for your specific market, I can just take an example from the legal perspective, which is my own expertise. We can see already now that there are shifts towards a more technical skill needed. For example, even for lawyers, that's a very non-technical subject normally. So I would kind of focus on what skills or skill set do we need going forward after this? How do we see the job market changing, and can I adapt to those changes already? That's a good thing if you can see them and if you can do that. If not, I would kind of try to prepare for the new job market in terms of digital skills, innovation and creativity, and also, as I think Karsten said this before, it's not a bad time looking into new possible solutions for things. I agree. I think I can just give an example. Yesterday, I actually saw a Spotify ad, which was for a lawyer, and they required, I think it was between 8 or 10 new tech tools that I, as a lawyer, as a legal profession for legal position, needs to master. And even then, I work with tech law. 2 of the tools I didn't even know before. So this opens up, entirely new job market. If you're soon to graduate or just graduated, I would look into new possibilities in developing that kind of skill set that's needed for the fall. And I know that that's a very fluffy answer, but we can see that there is a lot of shifts going on right now. And I think that's the best way to prepare, actually. Look into your own job market and what skill sets do we think we need long term for the future. When I applied for jobs a few years back now, the ad used to say like Word, Excel, the Office package. That was kind of sufficient to get a job. Now, Spotify, Amazon, they list between 8 to 12 different tools. It's all about management tools to creating kind of internal webinars to, obviously Office is still there, but it's just it's just one of many now. That's not the main one. So I would look into new skills.
I think Åsa went first, and then Niclas.
Okay, so am I muted? No, you can hear me. Okay, so I want to say kind of the same thing as I said before about this being prepared and planning things. That is really, really hard to prepare for what's coming because we don't know what's coming. And at least me, I've made plans and they never materialized. So I think life is much more by luck and chance. So I would say don't plan too much. Just do what you're interested in and be hungry, be creative, take every opportunity you can, work really hard, and focus on what you're interested in, and take chances. And you can sit down now and make a plan of your career, and I guarantee you it's not going to be the way you planned it. So I think you have to just be curious, be hungry, take opportunities, work hard, and do things that you have a passion for, and it's going to work out.
Niclas?
All right, thank you. I think that the greatest tool this person that asked the question already has, I think the brain, and if you practice and exercise your creative sides and your entrepreneurial sides, you will always land on your feet, whatever. So I think that's the most important things, the skills that you need to have. Of course, different kinds of computers, software or stuff like that, but those will be redundant in a couple of years. So your creativeness is the most important skill, I think, and that you could use within a company or as an entrepreneur or outside the company as your own entrepreneur and you're driving your own business. So as Åsa said, everything changes, and that's also my take home from so far from this life, that you can never plan for anything. A really short period of times maybe, but I don't think so.
Thank you, Niclas. So we have 1 minute left of this Trendspotting event. So to round things up, I would like to ask you to summarize in perhaps just a few words or a sentence, if possible, how your perception right now is about the future in terms of this crisis. Karsten, do you have any input?
Yeah, I mean, I think the real problem is that it's so hard to make decisions. So for me, the crisis is in two different parts. So one is the near future, like until summer, or like at least that's under control, but not good. And then it's like what happens after summer, and that's like vague. Like you can't really. Should I be worried? Maybe. Should I see opportunities? Maybe. It's so hard to navigate. So like mentally, you kind of just shut that off, I think, for now, and just, okay, short term, under control, we need to wait a little bit more, and then we can start to make decisions. But there will be a lot of board meetings in May and June, which will change a lot of things within existing companies, because that's when I think people will start to make decisions for the fall, because they need to make decisions for the fall.
Thank you, Karsten. Åsa?
Okay, so I'm new. Okay, so I mean, I think it's good to divide into different periods, and I think now we just have to get out of this, like the virus crisis. But then I think there's great opportunities, and especially for Sweden, I'm quite optimistic. I think people are very creative and innovative, and crisis, as Thomas said before, actually also leads to changes, and that we are more efficient and do things that. I think we've been doing a lot of things that are kind of wasteful. And I see that at university, we spend our time on doing really like fluffy, stupid stuff. And I think that this might kind of refresh us and focus on what's important, and that in the 10 years from now, we might look back at this and say that this was like a restart, and that we actually came out of this on good terms. So I'm quite optimistic in the long run.
Thank you, Åsa. Niclas, do you have anything?
All right. I'm actually also quite optimistic, and regarding the things that I work with at the university, I'm really looking forward actually to lots of things happening, and that there will be an acceleration when it comes to innovations for sustainable future, which I think we have a really good opportunity now. Maybe not change the whole economic system, but to actually rethink some parts regarding sustainability in the businesses.
Thank you.
Right, thank you.
Linn?
Yeah, I mean, I can just agree with everyone that's been speaking today. I think a lot of us are or in general, we're on the same page for a lot of things. I'm looking forward to more innovative and creative like solutions going forward, and I'm also very positive. So far, I've seen a lot of positive things coming out of this, and hopefully we can see more. I just think, as a lot of speakers has said today, one step at a time, one day at a time, 1 week at a time. Right now, we're all in crisis mode, which means we need to get out of that bubble, and then we can kind of, start taking the next step towards actually developing new ideas and building new companies and stuff like that.
Thank you, Linn. Thomas?
Yes, I think obviously no one of us knows what's going to happen next week or next month or sometimes even tomorrow. But one thing, going back to the question about what the student should think about, when I look back at my own time at Lund University, I remember that, I took a lot of courses, and I actually didn't finish many of them, and could probably qualify as a university dropout in the end. What has made most sense in my life was actually when I engaged in the students' newspaper, Lundagården, and then became the editor for Lundagården. I think that could be, even though challenging right now, to engage in the student unions and other social activities, as soon as we are going back to a bit more normal, don't forget about building your networks, because that's what you do when you have founded student organizations, but you also create a network which you can have more use of than Åsa, than all the courses you took at the university, because it's where you learn to have people around you that can challenge you, that can see you, that can give you new opportunities in the future. So I mean, I think most people can think about the logical things to do, but I would encourage you to do a bit of those out track stuff to actually build your own sort of sustainable future as well.
Thank you, Thomas. And with that, I want to thank you all in the panel for being here today. Very interesting discussions and talks. Thank you so much.
That's all for today's Trendspotting by Lund University. If you want to see more events like this, don't forget to visit our webpage and follow us on our social medias, LU Innovation and VentureLab by Lund University. And if you are a student that needs idea guidance, don't hesitate to contact us. Thank you for watching, and until next time, take care.